you so much for coming, Ruchir Sharma. I said that we have a very, very important guest. Right. Not only you're a portfolio manager at Morgan Stanley, you're also the author of Breakout Nations, which is an international bestseller.
Thank you very much.
And you talk about the BRICS, the emerging markets, the developing countries, yes, which includes Turkey, right?
Yes, that's right.
So I have really great questions for you.
Okay, fantastic.
Let's start with the US.
Yeah.
How do we see the market? Disappointment is only 88,000 new jobs in March. Is this really a disappointment, Ruchir? What do you think?
Well, I think that the market had done very well already. We had one of the best first quarter starts in recent history. And so I think the market was basically looking for some sort of an excuse for pulling back. And within a broad trend...
So this is an excuse to pull back?
I think so, because within a broad trend, there are many cycles. And I think that we have seen some peaking in economic momentum just now, because a lot of optimism got built up about the US economy. In the last 6 months, we went from worrying about a recession because of all the problems in Washington, the fiscal gridlock, to talking about the US economy growing at 3% or so this year. So I think that there was a huge swing in sentiment. And now we're seeing some natural correction that takes place after such a huge swing.
You're right, and the trade deficit narrowed. So we have been having some mixed signals from the economic data's angle. So I guess you're right. This is the excuse maybe, but do you expect any more pullback? If so, what is your estimate for the year?
Well, it's hard for me to sort of come up. I think that the broad trend, which I even speak about in the book, is that the US economy is doing relatively well.
Relatively.
Exactly. I think the key thing is relative. So as I call it, it's the best house in a bad neighborhood, which is the global economy currently is very weak. The other developed countries in Europe and Japan are performing quite poorly. So the fact of the matter is that the US is not doing that badly in such an environment. Economic growth in the US is pretty much what you would expect it to be after a major financial crisis. So I think that the US economy has some very strong points about it. The cost of labor is quite cheap here. Real estate now is quite cheap out here. The dollar is very competitive. I think all these factors make for the fact that the US economy is going to be on a relatively even keel for the next few quarters, I think.
Ruchir, I want to talk about your book again, In Pursuit of the Next Economic Miracles. This is the subtitle of your book, Breakout Nations, and then you say In Pursuit of the Next Economic Miracles. In regards of the main thesis of your book.
Right.
And under it, I want to ask you the main thesis too, but the developing countries, do you feel or see the demand to the developing countries is diminishing? What do you talk about in this book? But start with the main thesis. Well, what is the main thesis of this book?
The main thesis is that if you look back for the last 40 to 50 years, every decade there is some theme which captures the imagination of the world, every decade. In the 1980s, it was Japan. 1990s, it was technology. Last decade, the big theme was BRICS. That's what really a lot of people were very sort of excited by. And my point is that what is very hot one decade is rarely very hot in the subsequent decade. And I think this BRICS theme now is fading, that all these BRICS countries are facing their own domestic challenges. Growth is slowing down quite sharply in all these countries. In fact, China today is the only country where the growth is above the emerging market average of all the BRICS countries. Russia, Brazil, South Africa, their growth rates today are no different than that of the US, which is a big disappointment because these countries were set to catch up with the developed world quite rapidly. So I think what's happening is that those countries are facing their own domestic challenges. Even in India, the growth rate is down to 4.5%, 5% or so. So I think what's going on now is that new stars are emerging. And money is flowing towards these new stars. And some of the new stars I speak about are in Southeast Asia. I think Turkey features as one of my breakout nations in there. And then you got some countries in Latin America too, which are doing well outside of Brazil.
Interesting.
So this whole BRICS is being turned on its head. That BRICS was supposed to be this rising global axis, and that is now disappointing. And you got other countries across the world which are rising.
Is that why, just we show that the BRICS bubble is slowing down. Wall Street Journal just wrote an article, and we saw it in the terminal. It says by Andy Z, right, that the BRICS bubble is slowing down. So does it support your thesis? You said that he might have taken it from here. What do you say about that?
Well, I think that this is like this has been the main theme of the book and something which I've written about extensively. So I think that what's happening here is that all these countries are slowing down. And look at the stock markets.
Okay.
On average, the stock markets of the BRICS countries are down 40% today.
40%.
40% from their all-time highs.
Okay.
So that tells you about how they have disappointed in terms of expectations. Whereas in many other parts of the world, including in Turkey and parts of Southeast Asia like Thailand, Philippines, even in Indonesia, the stock markets are close to or are at all-time highs.
Okay.
So that's telling you how the leadership is shifting within emerging markets.
You talked about Turkey. There's a new acronym, PIVOT, P-I-V-O-T. T is for Turkey, Peru, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Turkey. You told me before our program, you don't like acronyms. And this is a new thing by Mr. Chandler from another institution. Do you agree with him? Pivot is the new thing, he says, including Turkey. Or do you disagree?
I'm really against acronyms. I think that these are great marketing tools where you sort of put countries together and then you try and package them. And then ever since BRICS succeeded, this rush is there to come out with new acronyms. I've heard of MIST. I've even heard of something called CIVETS, which is after some exotic cat or something.
That's right.
So I think that this is really ridiculous. This is very wrong kind of
no
packaging.
BRICS, no pivot.
Yeah, because I think that these acronyms are wrong. Because what happens with these acronyms is that then you tend to get wedded to the view.
Expectations.
Exactly. No, and in terms of that, what if one country doesn't do well in that acronym?
I see.
Then what happens? But I think people keep on defending those acronyms because they want to defend each country and they want to come up with something, some new hype. So I really think these acronyms are a bad marketing tool which mislead people, and you need to look at each country individually. Acronyms worked last decade because all emerging markets were booming, and you could sort of combine any emerging markets together and sell it as a package. But what's happening now is that we're seeing a lot of differentiation. Different countries are doing different things, and the growth paths are all over the map. So you need to look at each country now individually rather than package them in these marketing acronyms.
You said what's happening right now. Can we come to what's happening right now? Bank of Japan had some aggressive easing programs, and we saw the effect on the commodities. Commodities have been falling for 5 days. What else are we going to see? Is this going to continue? And yen plunged, and the equities a little got support. Is this going to continue?
Well, I think it could. I think they're trying something really dramatic in Japan. Again, expectations may have gotten a bit ahead, like we saw in the US because of the sharp rally that we saw. But still, they're trying something different. And I think that is quite creditable in terms of what he's trying to do. But you need to do much more than just printing money. Like, much more structural reform is required in Japan, and even that's part of the agenda. So it's quite sort of significant what he's doing. But I think the other point which you made is even more important, even for Turkey and for other countries.
Yes, especially for Turkey.
Yeah, which is drop in commodity prices. This is the single biggest positive, I think, for all the commodity importing countries such as Turkey. And as you know, there is no emerging market which is as dependent on commodity imports as Turkey. So I think the fact that the commodity super cycle of the last decade is now closing is a very big positive factor for Turkey.
Last 10 seconds. Here you talk about the emerging, the developing countries. In a week, you're going to have a new book about the developed countries. What is this going to be about?
Yeah, I mean, there's
already developed countries. Okay.
There's a new edition coming out in paperback next week.
Okay.
And what that does is I've written a whole new chapter out there about which countries in the developed world can be breakout nations. And they're the countries I speak about are the US, and possibly in Europe you may see countries like Germany, you may even see countries like Spain, etc.
And what's going to happen to them? The last 5 seconds?
Well, those countries could do much better than what people expect them to do.
Okay.
So expectations could be surpassed.
Great. Thank you so much.